All right, welcome back from the break, and I just want to add my thanks to Mr. Johnson, Ms. Colon, Deacon Nohadera, and Mr. Piercy for that first panel. And thank you to Dr. Berlin for your support of the symposium and always for the Moore Center. Our final panel is comprised of some of the main cast members from The Keepers, a Netflix documentary told in 7 episodes that examines the decades-old murder of Sister Catherine Sesnick and its suspected link to a priest accused of sexually abusing girls at what was then known as Archbishop Keough High School. While I call them cast members, the series is about their actual lived experiences. I'm going to briefly introduce them, and then we're going to play a short trailer from Netflix before we have our panelists speak. Ms. Abbie Schaub in the bluish turquoise. Yes, I realized with our last panel you couldn't tell who was who, except perhaps for Maurice. So Ms. Schaub is a retired critical care registered nurse. She graduated from Archbishop Keough High School with the class of 1970. And in 2013, she and some other Keough alumni reunited to try to figure out an unsolved mystery about their beloved high school English teacher, Sister Catherine Sesnick. Sister Sesnick was murdered in 1969. The story that they uncovered as they tried to unravel this mystery was not what they expected. And to this day, they continue to try to unravel the past to figure out who harmed Sister Kathy, as she was fondly known. Ms. Teresa Lancaster, in the white and black, in the middle, white and black, is also a Keough alum. She earned her law degree from the University of Maryland School of Law and graduated with honors in 2002. Before that, she earned a degree in social work from the University of Baltimore County. She established her law practice in 2003. Her work has included working with plaintiffs in Social Security disabilities cases, personal injury matters, family law. Currently, she works at the law office of Joanne Snyder, representing survivors of child sexual abuse. Ms. Lancaster was Jane Roe in a lawsuit against the Archdiocese of Baltimore and Father A. Joseph McCaskill, whom she and many others accused of sexual assault. She has become an advocate for other survivors of childhood sexual abuse. She works directly with victims through the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, a national advocacy group commonly known as SNAP. She also testified before the Maryland State Legislature in support of Delegate Wilson's bill to extend the statute of limitations on civil sex abuse cases. And we have Ms. Lil Hughes Knipp, and she is on your right. She earned a Bachelor's of Science in Communications from Notre Dame of Maryland University and a Master's in Applied Behavioral Sciences from here, Johns Hopkins University. So welcome back. As an associate professor, Ms. Hughes Knipp taught a master's level course on managerial communications at the Notre Dame of Maryland University. And she went on to a successful career as a marketing and communications executive. As Constellation Energy's leader of corporate communications, she directed a 60-person team through energy deregulation and several mergers. She later founded her own strategic communications practice, Hughes Knipp Consulting, that served nonprofits, universities, and corporations. Notable clients include the Notre Dame of Maryland University, the Maryland State Highway Administration, the Accreditation Board of Engineering and Technology, and the Prometric Corporation. Today, she dedicates most of her time to creating art and giving voice to pressing social justice issues. Please join me in giving a warm round of applause for these panelists. And I am going to play this, it's just a couple minutes long, this trailer from the documentary.
Baltimore has always been a quintessentially Catholic city.
The priests were the authority. Whatever they told you to do, you did.
The city has its level of corruption. Sister Kathy exemplified this spirit of compassion and kindness.
I have never had a teacher like that before. She was murdered our senior year, and it's always haunted many people in the community.
Our mission, we were driven to find out who hurt Sister Kathy.
People pop up from 45, 50 years ago who say, I have a story I'd like to tell you.
I believe Kathy Sesnick was killed because she was going to talk about what went on at Keogh.
There's an on-the-record public story of what happened to Sister Kathy, and then there's the world beneath.
The police department and the state could provide protection for the priest.
There were other people brought in, local business owners, politicians that were part of this network.
I can testify that over 100 victims have been abused.
Time is getting short for us to be able to figure out what happened to Kathy.
My father said to my mother, you want to know why I drink? Because we killed a woman and we put her behind the shop.
He said, you see what happens when you say bad things about people?
This goes bigger and deeper than we can imagine. The story is not the nuns killing. The story is the cover-up of the nun story.
Yeah. You don't come to this symposium to be bored. So I am going to, much as we did with our other panel, I'm going to give the floor over to each of our panelists to spend a little bit of time giving her own message. And then if you have questions that you would like to ask the panelists, please use the blank card. If you need a card, we've got extras. And write your question, pass it to the end, and our volunteers will bring this forward, and we'll address as many as we can. Abbie, do you want to start us off? Thanks.
My name is Abbie Schaub. I am a 1970 graduate from Archbishop Keogh High School. Sister Catherine Sesnick was my English teacher, and in our senior year of high school, she was abducted and brutally murdered, and the murder was never solved. Over the years, there have been urban legends about what happened to her, that the murder was covered up to protect people in a position of power. A friend of mine, Gemma Hopkins, who was in my class, around 2013, got back in touch with a gentleman named Tom Nugent, who was a reporter journalist who had done some stories on it, and decided that she would talk among people, see what she could find out. And I got sort of recruited into that effort. We started this purely as a labor of love for Sister Kathy. We wanted to understand if we could. We lived through the times, we knew the people. We thought maybe people who were afraid to talk to the police wouldn't be afraid to talk to some curious old women asking about someone that they cared for. We started a private Facebook page called AKHS Survivors, invited Seton Keogh and Archbishop Keogh alumni to join so we could talk about it privately. And what happened was a slow but steady swell of women coming forward to talk about painful events that had happened to them, one after another, after another, after another. I think we ended up with perhaps 35 to 40. I don't keep a list, so I don't have a hard count. The stories echoed each other. Strange, bizarre behavior by Maskell. Stories that they had gone to the school administration, that they had gone to priests, that they had gone to the archdiocese, including their parents, and that nothing was ever done. They were told to stay away from Maskell. That was it. Then we began getting distressing contacts from men and women from other Catholic schools in Baltimore, asking, begging if they could join our support group, because they, as Delegate Wilson talked about this morning, they were having emotionally difficult times, pain that was getting worse as they got older, and they were looking for some support, some understanding. And we had to say that we couldn't let them join because our original agreement was our private group would be just Keogh sisters, so people felt confident their privacy would be honored. we opened a public Facebook page called Justice for Sister Catherine and Joyce Malecki, who was another young woman who was abducted and murdered 4 days after Sister Kathy was, who also knew Father Maskell, our school chaplain. That page was more geared toward asking for information about Sister Kathy's murder, but it also played the dual role of allowing other abuse survivors from other communities having a place to contact each other and talk. The project just took off, is all I can say. We didn't have a brain trust where we had some big plan. Rather, people came to us with information, with suggestions, wanting to help retired FBI officers, retired police officers, retired clergy, teachers, family, friends, neighbors, family of Sister Kathy. The documentary producers, John Benham is somewhere here, hiding out.
Stand up, John.
John Benham was our photographer, cinematographer. We did that beautiful visual images that helped tell the story. Somehow it felt like something out there in the world wanted the story to be told, and it wanted to be told now, and it brought these hundreds of people with diverse connections to the story together to make it happen. We hope that we can't change the past. We hope that the pain of this story can help protect other youngsters in the future. Let something good come out of this ugly story.
Hi, I'm Teresa Lancaster, Jane Roe. When my case lost, the Doe Roe case, Jean, and my case lost in 1995, we lost on a technicality of the statute of limitations. The judge determined that we came too late and we had 3 years from age of majority to sue, and he threw the case out. At that time, I was totally crushed, and I believe you can see in the Keepers of what it did to Jean as well, because we did think we had a chance there to expose Maskell, and we underwent depositions about what Maskell did to us for 6 days, what sexual acts he did in vivid detail. And after that, I knew I had to just get back into life and my family, and I just went on to law school to try to help other people that may, be suffering and not be able to afford a lawyer. Well, then I got contacted by Frank Dingle of SNAP. I've been a member of SNAP for about 15 years now, and Frank Dingle told me that these ladies were starting a Facebook page. They're going to get Father Maskell. And I said, well, he's dead. But they're beating a dead horse, but I'll join in. So I I got on Facebook and I said, my name is Teresa Lancaster. I wasn't going to hide behind Jane Roe anymore. And I said, I'm here, to do whatever you want to do to expose Maskell as a serial rapist. And I believe in my heart that he was behind the Sister Kathy murder. And it just snowballed from there. And we joined in and shared stories, and things meshed together. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I came into the Facebook.
Good afternoon. My name is Lil Hughes Knipp. I met Father Maskell when I was 15 years old. I had not known him before. I got a call from the office and was told to go to his office. I went in and he told me that he was looking for a confidential secretary and that I had come highly recommended. I was really excited about the prospect of a third job because I really wanted a car. I had 5 brothers and knew that I was never going to get to drive the family car. So I started working with him right away, and I recognized that I was taking confidential files, writing confidential files on all of my classmates who were in therapy with him. He was the school's psychologist. And what was very unusual about the files that I was writing, I was a joint college and business major, so I could take dictation, was the topic matters. There was a lot of incest, bestiality, rape, you name it, any kind of aberrant behavior, it was in there. And so I was doing my best to act as if, oh, this just, any 15-year-old girl is familiar with this, and just did this as if it was a matter of course. Every day that I went in, I was given a cup of Coke. And I didn't get much Coke at my house because I was one of 10 children. And so that was not something that we had. Not till after I stopped working with him, did I really realize that I was being drugged. And the last day of school, 2 years later, he attacked me, tried to rape me, tore my clothes, told me he was in love with me. All of that. But during the course of working with him, it became clear that he was cultivating me and trying to make a big divide between me and my parents. And as a result of that, I moved out of my parents, from my parents' house right after I left high school and started down a path that was very destructive, drugs, I could not sustain relationships. I got married but got divorced right away. This is my dear third husband sitting over here. As Delegate Wilson said, his comments this morning were very, very familiar to me. I didn't really begin to remember a lot of what had been done to me till I was in my 40s. I completely disassociated. I thought it was only me that it had happened to. And so then I started to, I re-established a relationship with Jean Weiner, and we had been friends in high school, so I learned about her, and then I learned about others. And when the Jane Doe case came up, I had just married my dear George, and Jean asked me to join the case, and I said, oh, no, my life is great. I finally finished college. I was on my way to a master's degree. I had a great job. I was doing really well at work. I was getting promoted. I can't screw this up. But it was almost as if a Pandora's box had been opened up inside of me, and all of this ugly was coming out. And so even though I didn't join them within a short period of time, it had to be addressed. And I started to work with a psychiatrist to put back the pieces of my life and start to realize what was going on. And then thanks to Abbie and Gemma, I came to realize that this has happened to a lot of others. And thanks to John and his team, the Keepers was actually me coming into the light. For so long, I just lived in a shadow of shame, hiding from everyone what had happened to me and feeling so horrible about it. So that's where I am today.
My situation was a little bit different because the first time I went into Father Maskell's office, I went in for help because I was having problems with my parents. They didn't like my hippie style, and my boyfriends had longer hair than I did. And I went in there for his help. I was taught from elementary school that if you have a problem, go to the priest. The priest is God on earth. Mm-hmm. And I went in there crying and asked him if he could call my parents and tell them that I was okay. And my friend Linda went in with me. Well, he led her out the door, locked the door, and immediately took all my clothes off and started abusing me. So I always remembered that. I always remembered a lot of what he did. I would go to the lunch table and tell some of the girls there what Maskell did to me that day when he called me out of class. But there was times of lost time where, like I remember him taking all my clothes off and abusing me. I do not remember how I got dressed or taken home. But again, he would give me a Coke, and I just couldn't remember that. But I had memories from day one, and when my mom passed away unexpectedly of a botched biopsy in 1993, I started recovering other memories, more serious memories about the Dr. Richter's and the police, and that's when my recovered memory came back. But I always knew he was a pervert. I always knew that he abused me. He abused my friend Linda in front of me, abused us together. I never forgot that. But that made my situation a little bit different in that it was not all recovered memory. It was from day one. I knew that he was just a pervert, and I found that his nickname at St. Clemens was Maskel the Rascal. So a lot of people knew. A lot of people knew, and they didn't do a damn thing to help us.
Yeah, I wasn't harmed, which turned out to be good because I had enough distance that I was curious, how could this happen? Like your response would be if somebody came to you. And I began looking at Maskel. Maskel began abusing when he was still in the seminary. And he was abusing adolescent boys at a summer camp where he volunteered to help in the late 1950s. His friend, Father William Sims, was with him, who's also a known abuser now. He went on, they ordained him anyway. He went on to abuse for 40 years. The church knew, they did nothing to stop him. It's hard for us to sit and listen to the speakers talk about the process now for the church keeping people safe because they have these background checks and mandatory reporters laws. Because what happens is the church had a conspiracy to protect their financial interests and their reputation, so they would not pursue criminal charges against the priest. The Maryland State's Attorney's offices helped with that because they went along and they did not file criminal charges against the priest. If you look at the law, there's very, very few cases, criminal cases. I said, well, I can figure this out. Let's just look at the criminal cases where the priests were charged. There's maybe one in Baltimore.
And the church says that they're going to do the right thing here, and this won't happen again. Well, why can't I see Maskel's records? Why won't the Archdiocese of Baltimore release Maskel's records? Those records have not only things he did to me, but things he did to scores of other students. And they use the excuse that it's confidential.
Personnel records.
Personnel records. Well, we're out here, you know. You can release anything at all with my name on it. I'm out here, and I would like to see, you know, about all the others, and they're not telling the truth.
The other thing that is true is that this has, as you all know, this has happened all across the country. So all of this has been handled differently from diocese to diocese. In several dioceses, the records have been released as part of the settlement with the survivors. So to say that it can't be done is to ignore what is going on in other dioceses. So they certainly could do that.
Yeah, they talk about mandatory reporting, but priests, the legislature of Maryland agreed in the late 1980s that they would follow Catholic Church canon law, and that priests are not mandatory reporters for abuse information that's shared, quote, with an expectation of privacy. They had the system, the conspiracy system set up so that the church would say, raping children is not a crime, it's a sin. And one priest should confess to the bishop or another priest. And they were forgiven, go forth, sin no more, you're out of here, we'll move you to another parish.
And a lot of times I get questioned, well, why didn't you tell somebody? Well, Maskell had a gun, and he would sit his gun on his desk loaded, and he told me if I didn't do what he wanted me to do, and if I told anybody, he would kill me. He would not only kill me, he would kill some of my family. So not only that, I was being abused by his friends, his police friends. Who am I going to tell? I can't go to the police. My parents, I couldn't talk to them because I was having problems. They found a joint in my purse, and to them I was over the top, lost cause. Even though I had straight A's and I did want to go to medical school, I couldn't tell them because Maskell said, if you tell them, I'll have you put the Montrose because you're a druggie and a slut and nobody's going to believe you over me. So just try it and see what happens. And so I was scared out of my mind.
I think there were a number of things that happened to keep us quiet. First of all was like Teresa's family. I came from a very large Catholic family. And my father was 100% Irish, and he would say to me all the time, if the priest and the nun said you did it, you did it. And so there was a blind faith that operated in many of our families, and I think that Father Maskell knew how to pick his marks. And certainly with Teresa, her parents would let her go out with him. So that was one of the issues. His collusion with the police, they were protecting each other because they were all involved in this. He was sex trafficking us with the police, so that's why a lot of this was never solved. The other is the rampant sexism. We were in a girls' school that was entirely run by women, but it was, the priest was large and in charge. I mean, he could do anything that he wanted to do to any of us at any time. And so there was, I think that the women at the church, at the school knew. They had to have known over the course of time because it wasn't just our classes that it happened to, it happened afterwards. And I think either they looked the other way and they protected the organization, as we heard some of the speakers talk about this morning, why good people do bad things in the organizations. But women had no power then within the Catholic Church, and frankly, they have no power even today within the Catholic Church, but it was especially bad then. And he was able, in my case, he was able to call me out of class at any time, no matter what part of the day it was. I would get called over the speaker and called to come to his office, and no one would question whatsoever. And he would say, "I'll make make it okay with your teachers. Whatever you miss, they'll be fine with me saying it." You know what I mean? And I'm like, "Oh, that's great." Plus, I'm getting paid for it. But it was a very disturbing situation in retrospect because it was just so wrong on so many levels.
And Maskell is just one of dozens and dozens of priests doing the same thing, being treated the same way. The first 3 chaplains at Archbishop Keele High School are all now on the acknowledged sex offender registry. All of them liked boys. All of them were assigned to the all-girls high school.
Yeah, the real tragedy about this, the earlier speaker said, referred to the J. Jacobs study, which was a study that the Catholic Church had done. Most of the victims, there's this tremendous bell curve that goes on when we look at the abuse that happened from 1960 to, say, 85, and it's huge. But the real, most of the victims were boys. And the tragedy about that is that men usually don't come forward in these kind of situations. Women are, even though it'll take a long time, we are more likely to come out with this type of emotional stuff. But having been sodomized and victimized by priests, men will hold that in, and then you have to wonder what kind of damage does that do to them and how do they express that, you know, either violently or otherwise, as Delegate Wilson talked about earlier. The majority are men. He just happened to abuse us. I think he did prefer boys,
pitch hitter.
but he just happened to abuse us because we were what was available to him.
Right. Right. Anything that was available. I actually went upstairs to Father Magnus and begged him to take over my guidance case because Maskell had convinced my parents that as long as he has me under his wing, everything will be all right, and he would take care of me. And he convinced them that I was schizophrenic. He sent me to a MD psychiatrist who put me on Thorazine. I was taking that during the day. I didn't know if I was coming or gone. And I went up to Father Magnus and asked him to please take over my case. And Magnus just turned me and pushed me right out the door and shut the door on my face. Later on, I found out Magnus was raping all the girls too. So I guess I lucked out on that one, you know. But I was desperate, but what are you going to do? And Maskell convinced my parents the only person that I could be around was my friend Linda, who died 4 days after The Keepers aired. And he would pick Linda and myself up at my parents' house and take us for police runs and tell my parents he was going to teach us how horrible it is to get arrested. But on one occasion, on Halloween 1970, he took Linda and myself to a Lover's Lane type place where he took Linda out of the car and she was abused somewhere and I was abused in Maskell's car by 2 police officers. So we learned a lot but my parents truly believed Maskell he was intelligent, and he had them convinced that he was helping me, and he was going to get me through this crisis that I was in.
Yeah, the Archdiocese of Baltimore didn't make a mistake. They had a conspiracy, a plan system to protect the priests. They protected them from criminal charges, which means they don't get on the offender registry. Maskell could pass a background check today. He has no criminal convictions, and he's not on the sexual offender registry. So when they do not report priests who are abusing, they never get criminal convictions. They never get on the sex offender registry.
They're passing the trash.
They get right. They pass them around. They protect them. They hire them. The Archdiocese of Baltimore refuses to release information. We've cobbled, and I can't swear these figures are accurate. We've cobbled together newspaper stories, financial reports. It looks to us that the Archdiocese of Baltimore has paid just over $14 million in settlement since 1982 to quiet reports of sex abuse.
But if any of you think that we're getting rich off of that, that is a tremendous mistake, because there couldn't be more chintzy. I mean, the way that these mediations go down is just, there's nothing more degrading than to go through a mediation with the Archdiocese of Baltimore. You have a group of lawyers that are all Catholic, and they tell you how very sad they are that this happened to you. And then you're split up in another room, and then they bring in a number that is the most insulting thing that you can ever imagine. And then they just don't budge. Because what the Archbishop has said to me personally is that, you know, Lil, no amount of money is going to make this right.
Right.
You know, and they don't even try.
Yeah.
And so it's, I said to him, what would have happened to you if you were raped, if you were threatened, if you were injured in a way that was just something that screwed up your entire life? He has no answer for me as far as that's concerned, but he's pretty damn sure that money wouldn't be a way to solve that problem.
Right. And
you know?
Yeah, it's not that it's the money, it's that the church has formulated this conspiracy so that there is no other avenue left for them to pay any penalty at all.
And although it's not the money, I will say this. I had really screwed up my daughter's life. You know, I was disassociative as I could be as a young mother to her, which really caused her a lot of problems, which really then caused her daughter problems. You know, so what I would have what money I did get, and I know Teresa did the exact same thing, I handed straight over to her so she could help with her daughter, who was now a drug addict, and you gave it to your kids so that she could help with what, college fund?
No, all the grandkids needed braces.
Yeah, we're not talking a lot of money.
We're not talking anything.
No, I got, what, 40 grand minus the legal fees. It was about 28,000.
30% for
and I divided it up among the grandkids and figured a nice smile would make me feel better.
And you know, the Archdiocesan speaker, I'm sorry if I seem so aggravated at them, I am. This, you know.
I am.
This didn't start as an anti-religion, anti-Catholic thing. We were all brought up Catholic. And one of the ugliest things of this is the betrayal of confidence. Most of the people targeted were the ones raised by the most devout families who were taught that they obeyed the priest. The priest was God on earth.
That's right.
The ones who weren't raised that way sort of told him off and he left him alone.
Right.
He in confession was one of his favorite hunting grounds. He asked the girl how her sex life was. She said, "How's yours?" And he never bothered her again. But he targeted the most religious, the most devout, and he destroyed them.
Or the most distracted parents. I'm one of 8 children, and at the time, my oldest brother is developmentally disabled. And so he was the heart of our family, and my parents spent an inordinate amount of their energy on him. And so the last thing I would have ever wanted to do was to come home and put this on their plate, you know, and I actually had to wait for my father to die to talk about this because it would destroy him. He went to church every morning, and his faith was everything to him. He wore his faith like a hair shirt. And it just would have destroyed him to know that the church had done this. And so that's when I finally came out with this.
And this isn't in the past. The Catholic Church is still actively lobbying the Maryland legislature and controlling the laws.
Yeah.
People aren't aware of it. We're not looking.
They gave us 2 years of counseling. I mean, I've already had done like at least 12 before I even got to them. I'm like, oh, thanks. You know what I mean? That's really nice of you. You know, and so they don't, I guess what they really don't really appreciate, as Delegate Wilson so aptly put it, so forcefully, is how much this destroys lives. You know, how, I mean, it takes everything that you can muster to try to put your life back together again, and that's only with the help of really loving husbands and families and spouses and support. And, you know, I'm lucky to have that. But other than that, I don't know how people make it back.
Yeah. My support sitting right there. Randy, he's put up with, well, when my mom died, and if my mom didn't die, I wouldn't have come forward. I would not have come, I wouldn't be here. I woke up in the middle of the night screaming about being raped, and he just jumped out of bed, I mean, looking for somebody in the house. But it started to come together, and he supported me. I don't think you can get through this unless you have a support system. It's hell. And as far as making money, my daughter's ex-mother-in-law said, "Oh, she's doing great. She made so much money on Netflix. She can buy the grandkids whatever they want." And I got news. I went into this eyes wide open. I have gotten nothing. I didn't expect anything. No, I didn't want anything. I wanted my story told since I was 16 years old and raped. And to me, that was payment. So I didn't expect money from any of this, and I did not get any money from any of this.
Everybody in the documentary came forward voluntarily, signed release forms, and did this without being paid a penny. Because all these people wanted this story told.
So I want to ask a question of you all. And while I ask this question and while they respond to it, I want those of you who also have questions to, again, send your cards to the end of the aisles, and we've got volunteers who'll pick those up, and we'll answer as many as we can. We have a little bit of time. We have a fair amount of time for Q&A. So the Netflix documentary came out. There had been some reporting about this before the Netflix documentary. When I moved here, I remember reading, because one of the court cases was coming up. But the Netflix documentary came out, and I wonder if you could tell us the impact of that media.
It was overwhelming. First of all, I mean, it felt like for me, I was just everywhere we went, we were hugged. You know what I mean? So I mean, you come into the grocery store and people are like this, you know, and it's like, oh, you know, oh my God. And social media exploded. You know, I mean, my messenger was just like, oh, you know, and so I was overwhelmed. I didn't know anyone who had ever known me in my entire life now was contacting me, and so I just had to take some steps back from that. I felt like, for me, it was very rewarding because I suddenly felt like I was in the light, you know what I mean, where there was part of me that had just felt like I was just so shamed my whole life, and now I was suddenly, I felt better. And I spent a whole year just like feeling, oh, what's the reaction going to be? Like, is everybody going to hate me? Is it awful? Especially, I have a very Catholic family, so they're still, and I was just very frightened about what was going to happen.
I was pleasantly surprised because I didn't know if somebody was going to shoot me. Yeah. But I continue to get hundreds of messages, and it's all positive. And I went into the dentist, and the hygienist came out and hugged me, and they recognized my voice. I got a weird voice, but and I talk to people online from all over the world, and especially in South America where it's going on something awful, and Germany, Italy, France, I mean everywhere, and they're saying thank you. Thank you. And for the first time, they're coming forward and they're telling about their abuse by priests, mainly. That's rewarding. That's worth more than any money in the world to have someone tell you thank you like that.
Yeah.
What was the name of that school he almost sent you to?
Montrose. Maskell said if I told anybody he was going to send me to the school for bad girls called Montrose, where they don't serve hot dogs unless they cut them up because they know you're going to use them for something else. And he said, you'll never get out, and I'll see to that. But that was another threat, and he'd smack me around now and then.
I have a different story. When Maskell was at Keough, the Archdiocese school system had 3 of the most prolific pedophile sexual abusers in their employment. And I think they knew of all of them, and they left them there. Lawrence Brett, they took from Connecticut. He'd been kicked out of Connecticut because he bit a boy's penis and hurt him in the 1960s. And they sent him to a rehab place in New Mexico, telling the Connecticut parishioners that he was on medical leave of duty for hepatitis. So he did a tour of duty at this treatment center in New Mexico, and the church sprung him from there, and they put him in California, where he abused adolescent boys. And then he pops up in Baltimore in 1967, and they had assigned him as a diocesan priest. And in 1969, they assigned him as a chaplain to the all-boys Calvert Hall High School. 15 men have come forward so far from Calvert Hall. The Archdiocese had to know he was an abuser, that he liked little boys. He had this history. They took him anyway, and they knowingly put him in the all-boys school. Then there was John Merzbacher, which is where this story is going to come in. John Merzbacher was a lay teacher who was violently abusing young children, 11 years old, 12 years old, at the Catholic Community Middle School, another school in Baltimore City run by the SSND order that ran Archbishop Keough High School. A boy reported Merzbacher in 1973, and he was expelled. The principal expelled him. Parents wanted him back in the school, didn't believe the young boy. The principal said, you have to have a psychiatric evaluation done on him before I'll take him back, because he's got to be crazy to be saying these things. Somebody in the Archdiocese of Baltimore called in our chaplain Maskell to do the psychological evaluation on this 12-year-old boy. And this 12-year-old boy who'd been brutally raped and was telling the truth ended up at Shepherd Pratt for 10 months. So the same thing he had threatened the Keogh girls with, if they went public, he was going to tell their parents they were crazy and commit them. The Catholic Church called in one abuser to protect the other abuser. And the boy is still alive today and has testified in court cases and things. There was a clear conspiracy to protect the abusers while they were throwing the youngsters to the wolves. So it breaks my heart, as well-meaning as these official spokespersons may be when they talk about they're doing background checks and screening people and it was a mistake and it doesn't happen anymore. We're saying prove it doesn't happen. Open your books, release your records. Show us exactly who decided Maskell would keep him I don't mean to be disrespectful. I have no problem with the religion. I have no problem with people who love the religion and the church. My request to them is to treat the church as you would someone in your family who has an addiction problem. If you had a brother you loved who was abusing drugs, you would not give him money because you know he's going to hurt himself with that money. If you love the church, stop giving them money.
Yeah.
Because they are using that money to make small settlements, to quiet news stories down. When they can take your contributions and use that to make settlements, they don't have to dip into their assets. They don't have to sell any of their properties. It's not hurting them a bit. So go to church, love your religion, stop giving them money until they've proved they've released their records, they're open and transparent, and they've changed this. I think that's the only thing we can do.
Good.
There are some questions, and I think we may have time even for a couple more. So if we've got, if we have others, that's great. There is often the question of money when we try to hold institutions accountable, and it's a double-edged sword because many people feel that accusations can be lodged solely to get money, or that people who were victims somehow benefited because they were paid. And as I mentioned, our cost analysis indicated that, at least in the United States, a victim is going to lose somewhere around $300,000 over the course of her life, or his life, as a result of effects that we can trace to child sexual abuse. So this is a question about money, and I don't want it to sound negative, but the person asks, although the survivors haven't received much in the way of funding, it's the question of Netflix and whether, I think they're asking whether they're donating money to research or survivor work, but I think the first question is, did they make any money on the documentary?
Not a penny.
And you can't donate until you've made anything. So
the only person who made money were the film producers, and I hope they made $1 million. This was a small two-person company who were best friends since they were in the 4th grade. And they had done a few other small projects. They came into this project because the director, Ryan's aunt, went to Keogh and was best friends with Jean Warner, our Jane Doe. She didn't know, the aunt didn't know that Jean was Jane Warner, that she'd been abused. Right. When she heard through our Keogh group, when Teresa and Jane went public with us, the aunt reached out to Ryan and said, you have to come tell this story. And Ryan laughed because he said his mother and aunt send him 20 emails a week. Here's a story for you. He came and talked to us, and I was afraid that the survivors might be either portrayed in a negative light, that this was somebody wanting to make money off the story, or that Sister Kathy might be portrayed as a nun gone bad.
I was so afraid of Ryan before I knew him that I wouldn't meet. I met him at Panera Bread, and
a public place.
And Jess was with him. But I ended up telling him the stories of abuse, and the people around us must have had an earful. But then I determined that he was safe, and the next meeting was at my house.
Well, Ryan convinced me because he said that his grandfather ran the summer camp where Maskell abused in the 50s.
Wow.
That they were aware of the allegations of abuse there, that one of the victims, the male victims, had approached them asking if they had records. And Ryan said they had the records in their attic in the family home in Catonsville. And that to me was, and I'm not religious, God knows, but that was like one of these moments in this when it's a sign, like this invisible hand bringing people to us was saying, this is the man to tell this story, and it was the man to tell the story.
Yes, he told it beautifully.
Can we give a shout out to Ryan White? Yes. And Jessica Hargrave was the assistant producer, his partner in Tripod Media, and there were times in this where it would have been awkward with just John, the cameraman, and Ryan listening to these explicit sexual details. And how did that make you feel? So having Jess there as another woman, not only did she, of course, contribute the intellectual property and all, but having her there was very important to this process.
It was.
It was.
It really was.
Can I just say real quick?
Sure.
Just a quick bit of context.
Please.
Jessica and Ryan brought the story about we were working on it together for a year and a half, at least, before Netflix was involved. So this was an independent production from the beginning. So they didn't come in until way, way later in the process. And to Ryan and Jess's credit, this website that you have projected here, the Keeper's Impact, which I recommend everybody to go look at, that was paid for out of their pockets, and it was not cheap. They invested a ton of their own money into making sure that this came about, and it's curated by Jean Wayne herself.
This is for aftercare for anyone triggered by abuse or wanting more information about it. Somehow the people just, it's no explanation, the right people just popped up and everybody came together and got this done. But they started purely as an independent project. They had no money. They were flying in on red eyes from Los Angeles a week, a month.
Staying with family,
trailing John along with his camera equipment to things on a shoestring. They could have lost their company. They could have gone bankrupt. If they were taking a chance that they could tell this story and have somebody out there in the world want to buy it and show it. It was luck that we got their talent involved, and then I'm thrilled that they were able to sell it to Netflix. HBO was interested too, but they went with Netflix because they wanted the survivors to have the freedom to watch when they wanted to watch a little bit, to watch one part but not another. And their feeling was the on-demand Netflix thing was the best, safest way for our survivors. So that was their determining factor.
And they couldn't have taken more care. I mean, in terms of how they handled us as survivors. They were extraordinary.
And I will say it's not only survivors that might want to be able to take that documentary in different doses. It's well worth it. I have another question that touches a little closer to home in terms of my home. Johns Hopkins as an institution comes into touch with your stories at multiple points. Training, expert testimony, different things. Do you see a role of this institution to prevent future abuse in any way? Obviously we do, or we wouldn't be here today. But what would you want Johns Hopkins to do, if anything? What would you say is our role?
One of the sad parts about Johns Hopkins in relationship to Netflix was the role of Paul McHugh. He was testified in the Jane Doe case. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar with him, but in my mind, after looking at the role that he played as the expert witness in debunking repressed memories, he was, in my mind, a professional Catholic.
Absolutely.
And so when I looked at what he had said and done previously and the impact that he had on Hopkins, I'm a very proud Hopkins grad. And I loved going here. But when I saw what he did to the institution once he arrived, and he shut down, some very important work that was going on here, and everything that he had written and everything. I was sad to see that he was a person that was so high up in Hopkins was able to have such a negative impact.
And he had no comment when the keepers came out. And on repressed memory, I've found 53 legal cases out of state that have accepted repressed memory as valid, and with the post-traumatic stress disorder and the GIs coming home. And it's scientifically proven now in the hippocampus of the brain. But
it's also called dissociative amnesia, isn't it, George, in the DSM-5?
I think so.
So, I mean, it's...
But there was just a 2016 case here in Maryland, Scarborough versus Alset, where they didn't believe in repressed memory. So Maryland is lagging behind all the other states in accepting this as a very valid, scientifically proven thing.
There's also some research that I had just seen that we're used to seeing fight or flight. And there was an Australian video that police, they had done a training video for the police, and they added fight, flight, and freeze. And the freeze part was added for abuse victims, because it said that when repeated abuse happens, you cannot fight and you cannot flight. You can't, but the brain freezes and the lizard brain takes over. And so it's not making any more, the brain is not making any new memories. The person is just surviving whatever the abuse is going on. And so that is when dissociative amnesia, or whatever it is that you want to call it, takes on. And so they were training the police to investigators to ask the right questions of abuse victims, trauma victims, so they could get at those type of thing. And it was the first time I saw it used in a training thing. But as far as to your original questions, what that type of thing, I think Hopkins is always the leader, in terms of, I've worked for a number of universities in town, and Hopkins is always the leader. You're not perfect, but damn near so. So I think always looking to make sure that science is leading the way and not someone's particular religious point of view. And so unfortunately that was what was happening in that.
And McHugh's false memory syndrome didn't even exist. That was a coined phrase at the time.
He was part of a group that was...
Junk science.
Yeah, that was pushing that he was part of a group that was part of that by a parent who believed that had been accused of abuse. And so, yeah. There's a lot to that story.
There is a lot to that, and I appreciate the. I appreciate the acknowledging the mistakes that I think we have made, and the fact that we are moving forward.
Can I would love to give a shout out to the Moore family, because when I was looking at the website and I was looking at the description of why the Moore family started this, and Dr. Moore's acknowledgement of what had happened in his own family, I mean, I could not even come forward and say what had happened to me and what the negative impact it had on my life, and for him to be so courageous to say that on the page, that he had a pedophile in his family, and this is why he started this. And I mean, it's just, I'm like, amazing. That is really doing good out of a negative situation, and we just need more people like you, so thank you for being honest about that, because the honesty of Delegate Wilson, I mean, I could be honest about how that impacted me because you're honest, so.
Thank you. I would like to throw out one more question, and as part of our Help Wanted prevention project, which I described earlier in the day, which is targeted toward young people who have sexual interest in children, but who do not want to act on that, who understand that it would be harmful to children to do so. I've actually been doing some interviews with people who survive sexual abuse so that we can present their story as part of that intervention. And one of the questions I've asked them, recognizing that not everyone might want to answer it, so I want to put that out there, is what would you say to somebody who does have an unwanted attraction to young children, who wants to keep him or herself safe, who wants to keep children safe?
Who does have the attraction and wants to keep them safe?
Well, I think the concern is to keep the younger child safe. Unfortunately, pedophilia cannot be cured. And maybe this kid's interested in younger children. I might sound harsh here, but that person needs to be put in some kind of a environment where they can't get to the young children, and psych evals done to see, is this just a phase, or is this a pedophile in the making? That's just my opinion, because they can't cure them. They won't stop. You know?
Yeah, I will say we agree that sexual interest in children appears to be something that is quite stable. Stable as in sexual interest in your gender in women or men is a pretty stable component of your sexual attraction. Many people don't act on those attractions, and we've worked with a lot of them who really seem quite committed and have been quite committed to not offending, and we're trying to figure out how do we reach even more.
I think if you can share or have them talk to people who have been have survived child sexual abuse, and tell so that they can know that it just destroys lives. And if they do have a soul, if they do have a conscience, then maybe that will keep them from doing so. They might have as you say, they might have the attraction but not act on it. Then if they know that it's just going to ruin someone's life, that might be the deciding point.
Yeah, I think as a retired nurse, of course, you want to use medical therapy to try to help people. They were talking earlier about the concept of the abuser being a monster or this terrible thing. Even with Maskell, of course, I wasn't directly harmed. I always had some understanding that he somehow was mentally warped, damaged.
Yes, me too.
Perhaps he was harmed when he was younger.
Too.
My anger and my resentment has never been channeled toward Maskell. It's always been channeled by this whole village of people who were responsible for protecting children and failed to do so to protect themselves.
Good point.
So, for someone facing that problem, I have no dislike or distaste or anger. I'm happy that they're able to recognize and deal with that perhaps before they act on it, that they have a lot of insight and control. I would hope that institutions like this can do research to try to figure out how to help. If it's just a question of early interest in sex, that their body hasn't matured, or chronology where they haven't matured into an age where it's all right yet, that's for you guys to try to figure out, I think.
Thank you. I think we're going to say thank you to our panel, to these brave women. This brings us towards the end of our symposium. I do want to make a few closing comments. I want to thank all of you for your time, for joining us. I want to thank our panelists and our professors for their expertise and the generosity of their time. And of course, I want to thank Steve and Julia for their support and the many donors whose gifts and resources sustain the mission. obviously, we've had many brave speakers today, starting with Delegate Wilson and ending with Abbie and Teresa and Lil, and they are indisputably brave. I think it is worth pointing out that it's also brave to try to turn a new leaf in an institution. It's not easy to do so. It's not easy for many of us to have faith that it's going to work. So I do want to thank all of our panelists for presenting today and for their work in trying to move us towards a world where we focus on preventing this type of harm from happening in the first place. So thank you all. I also want to take a moment to recognize the Moore Center faculty, staff, and students whose dedication and hard work make this symposium successful. These include Ms. Amanda Ruzicka, who oversees our research operations, Ms. Stephanie Neal, who oversees our external affairs, Ms. Megan Collins, our development officer, Dr. Rebecca Fix, Dr. Rejmi Nair, and Dr. Luciana Assini-Mayton, who just in the past year have joined me to collaborate on prevention and other research endeavors. And our students, Kenny Fader, John Thorne, and Maggie Ingram, and Tenzin, Tenzin, I'm sorry, I'm going to mess up your last name. I'm going to leave it at Tenzin so I don't. Our doctoral and our master's students. We also had support from many other students today, as well as the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Office of External Affairs, and Office of Communications. And if we could just give those people a round of applause, please. And Marcus Knoll. I'm sorry, Marcus. Our research assistant, Marcus Knoll. Marcus probably did the most work. I can't believe I left you out. I'm sorry. I can't even begin to summarize what we talked about today. I'm going to leave it at thank you to all of our panelists. Our work continues. We will be back here again next year with another symposium. We do request that you complete that survey. Again, we read those responses. We change as well as we can to meet your needs. And I remind you of the Summer Institute course that we'll be teaching in early June. Thank you so much, and I hope we see you next year. Thanks.